Two startups started just about at the same time. One by now is a unicorn or almost that, and are now seizing everything AI has to offer to a good startup. Whereas the other company, again, pretty much the same age, I'm reminding you, are looking around and they're like asking, what? CI/CD is a thing? Time has passed for both of them, the same amount, but time is not equal. What you do with time really matters. You can't just expect time to provide you with experience, with maturity, with seniority. You have to make it happen. This is something that when I realized that I was seeing it all over the place in the industry, made me think about an old thought experiment that I heard Einstein made. I saw it in a cartoon when I was a kid, about imagining that we took two identical twins and one of them remained on Earth while the other went around space at speed of light or close to that. And when returning, we would see that the one who was in space has aged much less than the one that remained on Earth. Why? Because time is different when you're close to the speed of light, right? This is not a video about physics, but this is what, at least as far as I understand, that relativity tells us that if we move faster, time slows down for us. And what we see with some startups actually has a connection here. If you think that just waiting for time to pass by will get you there, you're going to find out that you're not making much progress. You have to learn how to utilize your time properly in order to get everything that it has to offer. Otherwise, you're just going to see your life, your career whizzing by. In this video, we're going to talk exactly about how we can wield time correctly and ensure that our team moves forward as opposed to staying put or worse, slowly declining. By the way, if you're new here, hi, I'm Aviv Ben-Yosef. I'm a tech executive coach and consultant, and I help people just like you create teams worth leading, because life's too short to lead a mediocre team. And I always say that, life's too short. And now that we're talking about time, I think that it has a much more substantive meaning, because time is the one thing that we all have in common. If you look around and you see people who have the same, years of experience, yet they seem to be in a different position, it's exactly about that. Most of the time, pun not intended, it's about us not wielding our time correctly. Let's make sure we put an end to that. There are a few assumptions that I see that are the cause of this. One is that people think that, okay, we're young, we're a startup, whatever, we have an excuse. We'll figure it out along the way. Now, I understand and I agree that you don't have to have everything nailed out from the first step. You are a startup, assuming you're a startup, and therefore you are not supposed to behave like IBM. And yet, when we allow ourselves this pass for too long, when we never reach a point where we say, okay, but maybe it's a time to step up a bit. When we never do that, we just end up remaining stuck exactly where we were. It's not like at any point in time someone will come to you and say, hey, now's the time to level up. It's not a video game. You don't have to get to level 3 before you can go to the boss. You'll find out that your team has run 5, 6, 7 years and still is operating like a year-old startup when it comes to how good your infrastructure is, your engineering velocity, and especially when compared to other companies around that have actually learned and utilized their time correctly. And even more, it's important to realize that busyness does not mean that you're making progress. And so many startups seem to confuse the two. Just because you're always working very hard, just because you always feel like you're, running from point to point, does not mean that you're actively getting better. It just means that you're filling your calendar doing something. But not every hour, not every sprint are equivalent to others. Whether you utilize your time in order to improve and get better makes a huge difference. And yet, so many startups essentially are just filling their time with whatever tasks, bugs, features, whatever are currently top of the backlog, not thinking about how are we actively getting better, focusing solely on the next deadline, on the end of the current sprint, and being so myopic that we never get any better. When you do that, you're essentially allowing yourself to create sort of a time capsule. And this is something that I see too often when I start working with a new startup and I realize that things there seem oddly familiar, but it's oddly familiar because it's like, putting on a show on Netflix and you immediately can tell from what decade it is because you can look at the clothes and you can look at the language, etc. And it's the same here. You start working with a company, it would be the same like seeing that everyone are pulling out these gigantic Nokia phones and you immediately know, okay, this is like 20 years old. And some of you, I bet, are actually doing the equivalent of startup life. Your team never took the time to invest in how they're operating, in relearning how things are being done, and thus you essentially are experiencing the same founding year of the company or the same first 2 years again and again and again, as opposed to really evolving and moving forward. The principle here is that sometimes we lie to ourselves. In Hebrew, we have a saying that essentially says something like, time heals all wounds, like you have in English. And it's like, just wait, it'll get better. But this is wrong, especially in work. Maybe with, having your heart broken. But when it comes to actual life, about a startup, an organization that needs to improve, needs to get better, you cannot just sit on your hands and expect things to spontaneously improve. You have to deliberately work on it. You have to make the time to invest in it, or you will be wasting the time. The delta that we see between teams is not luck most of the time. It's about deliberate focus, about working to get better, about experimenting, about learning new things, and ensuring that every sprint, every quarter is better than the last. It doesn't mean that necessarily you'll see every time better business results, but it does mean that the team itself is constantly getting better and thus has better and better odds at executing whatever it needs to be executing better. How do you do that? Here are 4 things that I tell my clients to ensure that they have in order to utilize time best. First is to not allow people to just ossify within the organization and allow too much homogeneity. Because when we have teams that are essentially the same people forever, and most of them from the same background, we seem to miss out on whether we're doing the same stuff or not, because we don't have enough difference going on. We don't have enough diversity. And that's why I really think that you need to be actively hiring people from outside your easiest path. Like if you already have a bunch of alumni from the same university, don't reach and grab another one. Try to have more diversity in your organization, people from different backgrounds, from different types of companies. Yes, we initially think, okay, it's amazing if we have a fintech startup to have a bunch of people who are fintech experts. That's fine for the founding team, maybe, but with time, you can actually gain much more diversity and better ideas and a team that can evolve and push each other and ask questions and not just be, an echo chamber, by creating a team that has people from different backgrounds, different types of companies that have seen different things. So I want you to actively think about how you're going to be wielding those spots that you have on your team. Whenever you can, hire another person. Whenever you're starting to work with maybe a consultant or an advisor or a freelancer on something, try not to get those same types of people again and again. Try to get some diversity in it. And whenever you have a new hire, someone new join, you gotta have to listen to them, have your ears perk up and notice what they're noticing. If they're, starting to work, they're doing the onboarding and they're looking around, they're saying, hey, why is this like that? We haven't been doing that since 2015. When you hear something like that, you better realize that they might have told you something that you've missed for a long time. Something that you've taken for granted, and someone from the outside looking in says, hey, this is very weird. This is not what I had expected. This is not what I've seen in the past 4 or 3 companies I've worked with in the past decade. Maybe this tells you that this is exactly one of those areas where your team has gotten stuck in a glacier and needs to be defrosted and move around a bit. Second, it's your role as a leader to ensure that your team balances short-term and long-term. I'm sure that you have a lot of deadlines, pressing features that you have to release, whatever commitments the company has made to clients, etc. And yet, it's your job as a leader to ensure that we are balancing that short-term focus with longer-term improvements, that we are constantly investing in getting things better. And thus, you have to manage how you're doing things and ensure that the team gets the time to do whatever you judge to be best. And if you think that you need to take the time to improve, to get better at a specific technology or upgrade something, you need to make the business case for it and get the time for it. Will you get everything you want? Of course not. But I can guarantee that if you don't even try, you'll never get the CEO to come to you and say, hey, you know what? I think you guys ought to take yourselves a couple of weeks and redo how we, talk to the database or whatever. Because if the CEO comes to you and tells you that, you're in big trouble. It means that those things that should be abstracted away from the business have gotten so problematic that they are now something that the business is coming to you and asking for. Instead, you ought to be proactive, looking at where you can improve, where you can try new things, and go to the business counterparts, go to product, explain to them what you're seeing here, what you're hoping to get, and invest in that as well. Not only that, and not only that, you're gonna have to find the right composition, the right balance between the two in every quarter and every sprint, but still always make steady progress, always keep improving. And this connects to the next thing, which is ensuring that your team is experimenting enough. Don't have your team just do the things that are obvious, but have enough experimentation going on. Sometimes we have to try new things. I have a bunch of videos about innovation, about intermissions, as I call them, innovation weeks, whatever, and about the concept of injecting habitual innovation into your organization to ensure that people are not stuck and that people are constantly trying new things, evaluating them, having experiments. I'll try to link to those somewhere on screen or in the video description, but the takeaway that's most relevant for this video is for you to realize that your team, when balancing short-term and long-term, when you're doing long-term things, from time to time, you have to do the things that aren't guaranteed to be a slam dunk. Again, depending on your time, I don't think there's a rule of thumb here, but every once in a while, the team needs to be doing something that might not work out, that might turn out to just be a waste of time. But if you're always only taking the guaranteed paths, the guaranteed routes, you will probably find the improvements and the things that can make or break a company way too late, when those become obvious. And we see it right now with AI, but we've seen it all over the place in our industry. When we wait too long, it just might mean that maybe you're not dead as a company, but you're going to be always too many steps behind, and eventually it's going to be too much to ever catch up. And lastly, ensure that you're getting enough exposure to the outside world. I have a video about that from a month or two ago, and I'll link to that. But I think that it's important to realize that if the team doesn't see and learn regularly what's happening outside, it will very likely not realize that it's staying put. The startup that I was given as a real example earlier about them realizing that their CI/CD is abhorrent, they just happen to have the same DevOps team run in the company for over 5 years. And therefore, no one really there within that DevOps team realized how back they were. They always had so many things to do, and as they were scaling, they kept trying to get things better, but only adjusted to how they knew how to do things. They didn't realize how much better things were outside because they never went to conferences. They did not go to meetups. They did not have enough of a network for their friends to tell them, hey, why are you still doing things like that? And that's how you end up trying to manage, I don't know, a chef or puppet sort of setup so many years after everyone has moved on. It doesn't mean that it is necessarily bad, but it's likely bad, and you're very likely to not notice it till it's too late if you're never getting any outside exposure. And to wrap this up, I want you to think, is your team actively getting better, or is it just whiling away time, doing whatever you ought to be doing and hoping things get better? Are you actively managing and investing your time so that you are improving, trying new things, and again, becoming better every quarter? If not, you're losing out. If you need any help with that, you have my email in the video description. But in general, I think that you have to invest in yourself because no one will invest in you before you believe that you and your team merit that investment. That's it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, again, my email is in the video description. I'll be happy to hear from you. And if you like this, please like and subscribe. It really helps. I'll see you here in the next video. Ciao.